There are few among them that still remember the sea, the endless, swallowing blue that once defined humanity's home. In the 41st millennium, the oceans are not places of life. They are prisons of pressure, of drowned cathedrals and forgotten gods. And yet, in one of them something moves. The world was called Thalasser, an ocean planet far beyond the segmentum tempestus, 98% water, 2% ruin. Its surface shimmered like mercury under a dying sun, but beneath the mirror lay cities of coral and bone, carved by hands not entirely human. The Imperium once called it a frontier resource world. Its seas held promethium-slick plankton, bioluminescent kelp that could be burned as fuel, and abyssal fauna used in gene experiments. But that was before the tides began to sing. At first, the administratum dismissed the reports as heresy or hallucination. Fisher servitors spoke of lights beneath the trenches, moving patterns that answered their hymns. A crew of Aquila landers vanished while lowering sensors into the equatorial gyre. Days later, their wreckage washed ashore, covered in barnacles that formed words in High Gothic. You forgot the covenant. The ecclesiarchs burned the beach. They burned the people who saw it too, and still the sea whispered. The survivors say the first true sign came with the storm of saints, when a warp current ripped through the system like a god's exhalation. The sky bled emerald and gold, and every ocean on Thalasser rose higher than its gravity allowed. Out of those waves came a man, or something close enough to make men fall to their knees. His eyes glowed the color of lightning striking salt water. His skin bore the scars of pressure and age, and around his shoulders hung a mantle of living kelp that shimmered with biophosphorescent light. His trident was no imperial relic. It thrummed with energy that bent the tide itself, and when he drove it into the seabed, the ocean stilled for 100 kilometers. He said nothing. He did not need to. The waters themselves listened. Some call him Aquaman, a name surviving from pre-imperial Terran myths, a word that meant king of the seas. Others whisper that he was not born of man at all, but of the old ones, or perhaps of some ancient emperor's experiment cast away into the void. Whatever the truth, He rose at the hour when the Imperium's dominion faltered and the ocean demanded its due. We only know this. When he emerged, the seas remembered their power. Storms followed him like hounds. Leviathans once docile became his vassals. Even the great imperial submersibles, the iron Leviathans of the Navis Nautica, found themselves torn apart by currents no machine could predict. Thalasser became a fortress of tide and terror, cut off from the void by storms that defied the Mechanicus understanding. And then came the first prayer. It was not to the Emperor. It was to the king below. In the manufactoria spires that rose like barnacles above the waves, faith began to change. Where once priests sang of the emperor's light, they now murmured of balance, of tide and depth, of a God who did not sit upon a golden throne but walked beneath the waves. The Inquisition sent a detachment of Ordo Hereticus agents to purge this blasphemy. None returned. Their landing ships were found days later, broken not by fire or blade, but pressure, as though they had been crushed by the hands of the sea itself. A message was carved into the steel of their wrecks in perfect Gothic script. You build your empires upon my grave. From orbit, the Mechanicus attempted orbital bombardment. Their plasma strikes boiled away millions of tons of ocean. But when the vapor cleared, the world beneath had changed. The water had formed a vast spiral vortex, spinning like an eye, and within that vortex, something vast and aware gazed upward. For one heartbeat, the void ship captain swore they heard a voice carried across the Vox. You cannot burn the sea. Then the vortex reached upward, and the fleet drowned in orbit. Weeks passed. The Imperium declared Thalasser excommunicate traitores. Its coordinates were scrubbed from the stellar cartographs. Pilgrims were told it never existed, but on the fringe worlds nearby, where rumor travels faster than light, whispers spread of a new God, not of gold and fire, but of salt and silence. They spoke of the Sea King who ruled where light could not reach. They said he commanded not just the waters, but the warp tides themselves. Some said he hated mankind for what it had become. Others said he mourned it. The truth is deeper than both. For the sea, like the warp, keeps every secret it is given. And in that abyss of drowned empires, Aquaman found not just the ghosts of humanity's past, but the souls of those the Imperium had cast away. The mutants, the psychers, the drowned, they came to him in dreams, and when they opened their mouths, bubbles rose like prayers, and he answered them. But that was only the beginning, for when the warp storms cleared and Imperial scouts once again glimpsed the black mirror of Thalasser's oceans, they saw something that turned every man aboard to silence. The seas were alive, not with waves but with armies, columns of armored figures, their armor coral-grown and sea-worn, stood upon the waves as if upon stone. Leviathans the size of hive spires swam in disciplined ranks. At their head stood the Sea King himself, trident raised toward the stars. And behind him, from the deepest trenches of that world, something else stirred. Something vaster, older, and patient. The Imperium thought it ruled the stars, but the sea, eternal and forgotten, had never consented, and now it remembered. The sea remembers every promise man has broken. It does not forgive. It waits. Before the Imperium came, before the Emperor's light seared the stars into order, there were worlds where humanity's ships fell silent, not from war, but from awe. Thalasser was one of them. It was not conquered. It was discovered, or rather rediscovered, like an old wound reopened. When the explorator fleets first reached it in the early days of the Great Crusade, they found a planet already claimed by water. There were no continents, only scattered archipelagos built atop coral towers so ancient they seemed fossilized in time. Beneath the waves, their sensors failed. Vox signals warped and echoed back as whispers, sometimes in binary, sometimes in voices long dead. The Mechanicus believed the planet's oceans were saturated with psychic resonance, perhaps remnants of the old night, or a failed human colony where mutation had become heritage. Others, those who listened more than they measured, called it something else entirely. They called it the deep memory. The first descent, according to recovered logs from Muggos Hydrolex Ixia. The first man to descend into Thalasser's abyss was a diver named Captain Merrick Orris, a void sailor of Catachan stock. His descent pod carried him 12 kilometers down before the lights began to fail. His last words, recorded through static, were these: "I see cities and faces. They're breathing water." When the pod resurfaced 3 days later, its hull was cracked but intact. Orris was gone. In his place lay only a trident, metal of unknown origin, its surface carved with sigils resembling Terran runes from pre-Old Earth myth. The Muggos deemed it Xenoarchaeotech and sealed it in stasis. Within a week, every servitor guarding it drowned in its own blood. The trident was jettisoned into the ocean. It returned the next morning, impaled upright in the sand outside the Mechanicus outpost. No footprints led to it. The locals began to whisper that the sea had chosen its emissary. The Covenant begins Thalasser's inhabitants, mutated descendants of early human colonists, were an amphibious people. Their lungs adapted for both air and water. The Imperium branded them abhumans, though they still bore enough resemblance to man to be tolerated. They worshipped not the Emperor, but the Depth Father, a god of tide and silence, whose face was always hidden behind the reflection of the waves. They said the Depth Father had made a covenant with their ancestors. Keep the balance between the living and the drowned, and the sea will cradle you. When the Imperium demanded conversion, the ocean people did not resist. They simply submerged. For weeks, the surface outposts heard only the hiss of wind and waves. Then one dawn the waves turned red. The waterborn had returned, not as worshippers, but as executioners. Every Imperial outpost along the Thalasser archipelago was found flooded. No gunfire, no explosions, only signs of drowning. And on every bulkhead wall, written in salt and barnacle, was the same phrase: "You broke the covenant." The king beneath it is said that the Sea King Aquaman was born that night, but others say he had always existed, dreaming in the trenches of the Abyssal Maw, a trench so deep that even Mechanicus augurs failed to find its floor. Legends say he was the last survivor of Atlantis, that mythical Terran civilization swallowed by ocean long before the Age of Strife. They say the Emperor himself once sought Atlantis' secrets, gene modification, biohydrodynamics, pressure resistance, and that this king was one of the Emperor's lost prototypes, a being forged to command the seas of long-dead Terra. But when the Emperor turned his eyes to the stars, he left the ocean behind. And from that abandonment, bitterness festered. The king beneath waited. For millennia, he listened to humanity's wars echo through the deep, like thunder rolling across distant coasts. He saw the Imperium rise, its cities choking the air and its faith strangling the natural world. And he remembered what it meant to be forgotten. So when the Imperium's ships returned to Thalasser, he rose. First tragedy, the flood of St. Neris. Imperial records speak of the flood of St. Neris, an event classified as an unsanctioned tidal uprising. In truth, it was the first war between the Sea King and the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy had declared a crusade to purge the ocean of blasphemy. A fleet of 40 warships entered orbit. The people of Thalasser sang hymns of the tide and waited. On the seventh day, the oceans moved. It was not weather, it was will. The tides rose beyond physics, curling like living things. Leviathans emerged, their hides covered in iron barnacles and coral armor. At their center stood Aquaman, trident in hand, his eyes burning through the storm. He did not attack first. He simply raised his weapon, and the sea obeyed. The fleet above watched as columns of water pierced the clouds, tearing ships from orbit like toys. The crusade was undone in a single day. St. Neris himself, who led the fleet, was found impaled upon a coral spire 3 kilometers high. His body still kneels there, facing the horizon. To this day, the locals call that place the Martyrs' Reef. The age of silence after the flood, Thalasser disappeared from imperial charts. Warp storms encircled it, as though the planet itself willed isolation. The few who escaped spoke of the covenant restored, a pact between the king beneath and his people. They would guard the oceans from the greed of the stars, and the stars would learn to fear the deep. But fear in the 41st millennium is never enough. The Imperium forgets quickly, and the sea never forgets at all. The old recordings end with a final entry from an explorator priest before his transmission cut out. The oceans, they speak his name now. The waves form words when the moons align. We thought the sea was lifeless. We were wrong. It's listening. And so the legend of the Sea King of Thalasser became a ghost story told in the void, until the day the tides reached beyond their world, and the ocean began to whisper across the stars, "We live where light dies. We breathe because the sea allows it. Every heartbeat is borrowed from the deep. There is no sunrise on Thalasser, only gradations of blue. Morning is the hour when the waves hum louder, when the pressure in one's bones softens slightly and the abyss lightens by a shade. We do not measure time by the sun. We measure it by tide and pulse. When the tide recedes, we surface to harvest. When it returns, we pray. Life among the coral spires, we live in what the Imperium would call settlements, though they are more like reefs grown into purpose. Entire neighborhoods bloom like living coral, their walls pulsing faintly with bioluminescence. The structures breathe with us. We seed them with plankton and song. They grow stronger when we feed them with our dead. Children play among the anemone tunnels, learning to hold their breath until their hearts slow. They must reach the 10th chamber before their lungs give out. If they do not, the sea claims them early, but the elders say that is mercy, not loss. We eat what the sea provides: flesh of deep fish, salted kelp, eggs of blind leviathans. Food is never certain. Sometimes the ocean grows silent, and the waters yield nothing for weeks. That is when the hymns grow louder, when we line the shores and chant until our throats bleed, begging the Depth Father to forgive whatever sin we do not understand. And when he forgives, the waves return with bounty. Always a price, always a trade. Work and worship, the line between labor and prayer is thin. Divers are also priests, and priests are often butchers. Each descent into the deep is both harvest and confession. Before diving, we mark our foreheads with salt and whisper, "Pressure, forgive us." No one dives alone. The water is full of voices, some our own, some not. The elders say they are the echo drowned, the souls of those who went too deep and never returned. They speak in bubbles that never reach the surface, repeating words like remember, repent, or sometimes only help. Children are taught to answer them politely. To ignore a voice is blasphemy. To follow one too far is suicide. And yet, every generation, one or two vanish into the black. We call them the bound. The priests say they have been taken by the Sea King himself to serve in the trenches where no light remains. Punishment and purity above the surface, air dwellers of the Imperium punish sin with fire. Below we use the deeping. A sinner is tied to a coral weight and lowered into the trench until their bones creak. The water crushes but does not kill. The mind breaks long before the lungs. Some return, their eyes milk white, their voices filled with strange calm. They become depth speakers, priests who no longer breathe air, only water. They walk among us in silence, their skin cool as the abyss, their mouths murmuring currents instead of words. When one touches you, your heart slows to match the rhythm of the tide. It is said that the Sea King himself listens through them, watching his people through borrowed flesh. No one envies them. No one disobeys them. Faith in the depth, Father, we do not pray for salvation. We pray for balance. The depth, Father, does not promise joy, only continuation. His creed is simplicity itself. The strong sink, the faithful float. Our temples are open air, built on cliffs where waves strike like whips. The central altar is a basin of seawater that never dries, even in the stormless season. Each morning, we fill it with offerings, blood, scales, hair, teeth, and recite the oldest chant we know. The sea remembers, the sea forgives, the sea reclaims. The oldest of us claim that when the Sea King first appeared, he spoke those same words, that he brought order to chaos, made the storms kneel. But now, some whisper he has grown distant, listening to voices beyond our world. When the ocean grows too quiet, the elders fear he is dreaming again. And when he dreams, the sea itself begins to change. The quiet madness, no one escapes the pressure. It is not just weight, it is presence. It hums in our skulls like a constant prayer. Too long below and thoughts dissolve. We see shapes that are not there, faces in the current, hands reaching through the coral walls. We call it the blue dream, the slow sinking of the mind into the ocean's collective memory. Those afflicted begin to speak in the plural. We hear the tide. We remember the first flood. We are forgiven. The priests do not treat it. They call it a blessing. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps the sea simply takes back what was always hers. Daily offerings and the fear of surface to the Imperium. The surface is freedom. To us it is exile. Those who blaspheme are sent upward onto the barren isles that dot the equator. The air burns their lungs. The sun blinds them. They die quickly, or worse, they live long enough to thirst. When the wind carries their screams back over the waves, we are reminded why we obey. Each evening, when the moon fractures into 7 reflections upon the sea, we gather by the shore to whisper our sins into the foam. The water takes them. Sometimes it brings them back, and sometimes it brings answers in the shape of strange fish or drifting bones or messages etched in shell. Once, an entire whale surfaced, its skin carved with words that glowed from within. He watches, he waits, he weeps. The priests sang for 3 days. The storms began on the 4th. The Sea King's absence, he has not been seen in a generation. The trident is kept in the deepest temple, guarded by the depth speakers who never sleep. Some say he has merged with the ocean itself, that the tides move because he dreams. Others whisper that he has gone beyond Thalasser to seek the source of corruption spreading through the void currents. But all agree, when he returns, it will not be in silence. The ocean will roar with the fury of 10,000 storms, and every soul who betrayed the covenant will drown in their own blood. Until then, we work, we sing, and we drown our doubts in the rhythm of the tide. Because that is what it means to live beneath the Sea King's gaze. To endure, to obey, to forget, and so the days pass, one tide bleeding into another. The surface burns with wars of faith and fire, But down here, beneath the pressure, the ocean waits. It always waits. The sea is beautiful because it kills without hatred. But men learn to love the drowning. We speak often of the Sea King's justice, but never of his mercy, perhaps because there is none. The Lasser is not ruled by kindness or cruelty. It is ruled by pressure, the unending, silent truth that nothing beneath the sea rises without cost. Power here is weight, and every heart that beats owes its rhythm to the will of the tide. The surface world burns with fire and faith. The depths rule with silence and fear. The court of currents, the king's court, is not built of stone or coral, but of motion. It drifts through the abyss, a cathedral of slow-moving columns and swaying gardens, illuminated by the blue glow of abyssal leviathans chained to the floor. The throne itself is carved from the shell of an ancient god-beast, bleached white, its surface alive with etched currents that move like veins under flesh. It is said the throne breathes with him, that when he is angered, the ocean tightens, and when he grieves, it weeps. Around him swim the tide wardens, his chosen enforcers. Their armor is bone and metal, plated with scales of extinct leviathans. They carry blades that hum with water pressure vibrations sharp enough to cut through ceramite. Their duty is simple: to keep the covenant intact through obedience or through death. There are no words spoken in the court of currents. Orders are transmitted through wave sign, the language of pulse and current, understood only by those who have served the king directly. Even to look upon him for too long is forbidden. His gaze makes the blood slow, the mind quiet, as if the sea itself were whispering inside your skull. The chain of silence no empire survives without bureaucracy, even beneath the waves. The Sea King's domain is maintained by the order of the chain, a caste of priest-scribes who record every birth, every dive, every death. They tattoo the records into their skin, layer upon layer, until their bodies resemble maps of current and tide. When one dies, their flesh is dissolved and used as ink for the next. The writing continues without end. The order has one law that transcends all others. The sea does not lie. If your record is wrong, you are lowered into the trench. The sea decides the truth. Some come back, most do not. Those who do speak with the slow patience of stone, and from their mouths drift pearls formed from their own guilt. The pearls are collected and offered to the depth speakers. They say the Sea King keeps them close, to remember every lie that was confessed beneath his reign. Punishments of the deep, there is no flame under the ocean, so punishment must take other forms. The king's justice is executed through ritual unmaking. The simplest form is the salt binding. A criminal's body is injected with crystallized saline, transforming flesh to brittle white coral. They remain conscious for days, praying for the tide to finish what judgment began. For greater crimes, there is the crushing. The condemned is sealed inside a transparent sphere of reinforced shell and sunk into the trench. Pressure builds over hours, bones compressing until their screams become bubbles that rise to the surface. Bubbles that the priests read like omens. And for betrayal, especially betrayal of the covenant, there is only the drowning below, a ritual so sacred no one has ever returned to speak of it. The depth speakers escort the condemned into the abyssal maw itself, chanting hymns that make the sea tremble. The water grows dark, then still, and when they return, the depth speakers carry new marks upon their flesh, marks that glow when the king passes near. It is said the drowned traitors become his eyes, the faithful hierarchy at the top. The Sea King himself, half myth, half god, wholly obeyed. Beneath him, depth speakers, conduits of his will, neither living nor dead. Tide wardens, his soldiers, bound to him by oath and water. The chain, the record keepers maintaining order through memory. The drowned-born, the working people, those who dive, harvest, and sing. No one questions their place. To rise is to be crushed. To fall is to vanish. Yet the system endures, beautiful in its cruelty, precise as the flow of current through coral channels. Sometimes we tell ourselves that the Sea King does not see us as slaves, that we are part of a balance grander than our suffering. But deep down we know better. Balance, like the sea, cares nothing for the drowning. Symbols of power, every citizen wears a mark of depth, A small scar burned into the wrist during the rite of submergence. It represents how deep one has descended in service. The deeper your mark, the closer you are to the king. Those who survive dives beyond 30 fathoms are considered touched by the Depth Father himself. They are given silver masks shaped like fish skulls, allowing them to breathe water indefinitely. The Tide Wardens bear tridents, miniature reflections of the king's weapon. Each trident's tips are filled with a drop of his blood, harvested in ancient ceremony. When drawn in battle, they hum with the sound of distant thunder, reminders that their God still bleeds for their cause. Yet even these symbols carry irony. For all their might, they corrode. Salt eats everything, even faith. Cruelty in the name of order, we tell ourselves cruelty is necessity. That the drowning of a few preserves the calm of the many. But the truth is simpler. Fear sustains faith. Once a cycle, the king's priests enact the rite of stillness. The entire city must fall silent for one full tide. No movement, no speech, no light. The weak panic. Some die of terror. When the tide returns, those who broke silence are taken by the depth speakers. None resist. The ocean, after all, rewards quiet. In these rituals, we glimpse the king's logic. He does not punish for rebellion. He punishes for noise. In his world, stillness is purity, silence is devotion, and the absence of resistance is the truest form of loyalty. We have come to worship our own suppression, the irony of the depth, and yet there is irony in our obedience. We call him Savior, but we labor in darkness. We praise balance, yet we live beneath tyranny. We honor the sea's fairness, though it devours without distinction. Sometimes, when the currents quiet and the leviathans drift asleep, a strange thought surfaces. What if the Sea King himself is not free? Perhaps he too is bound to. There are oceans even the emperor never saw. Beneath the sacred crust of holy Terra, deeper than the vaults of the Mechanicus and the cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, there lies an ocean blacker than night, older than faith, and hungrier than the warp itself. It began with a sound, a hum beneath the waves. The The surface priests thought it was tectonic movement, a minor quirk of the old Earth's dying heart. The Adeptus Mechanicus sent Auspex drones, and none returned. They sent men next, and only static came back, laced with the sounds of something vast moving through liquid darkness. The Imperium had forgotten the seas. In the 41st millennium, water is a relic, a scarcity more precious than promethium. Planets are dry, scorched, hollowed. Ships sail only the void. So when the ocean itself began to whisper, no one listened, until it answered back. The first to die were pilgrims. They walked the coasts of Terra to bathe in the last holy waters of the Emperor's homeworld. A ritual so ancient no one remembered its meaning. The waves rose to greet them. They screamed hymns as they were pulled beneath, dragged into the depths by hands unseen. When the water stilled, the priests swore they heard chanting echo from below. A prayer not of man, but of something that remembered being one. The Vox recordings were archived, forbidden, then sealed, but that was only the beginning. Weeks later, orbital augers detected movement in the deep trenches, things vast enough to distort magnetic fields. Entire habitats went dark beneath the waves. The Mechanicus called them anomalous void signatures. The Inquisition called them heresy of the abyss. But those who survived the shorelines had another name. They whispered it through blood and salt. The Sea King. He came with the tide, wearing armor made of living coral and chains forged from drowned shipwrecks. His eyes burned gold, brighter than a sunken god's rage. His voice split the water itself. Your emperor has ruled the land and the void, but the seas were never his to claim. He raised a trident, old as Terra's birth, etched with symbols that even the Mechanicus could not decipher. The waters obeyed. Leviathans the size of cathedral spires broke the surface, beasts that had slept since the age of Terra's innocence. They bore scars of ancient wars, human carvings across their hides, prayers in dead tongues. The Imperium sent Scutarii legions to the coasts. The waters swallowed them whole. Their Vox signals faded beneath static, like screams beneath thunder. And from the depths, New ships rose, living vessels of bone and shell, bound by something older than the machine god. Their crews did not breathe air, they inhaled the abyss. Their banners bore a single sigil, a crown carved from coral and blood. Scholars argued in secret, was he a lost Primarch? A warp entity born of the planet's grief? Or the myth reborn, the Aquaman, the forgotten god of the ancient sea, dragged through time into mankind's most wretched age? None could agree, but the ocean answered only to him. And as the tides began to climb higher each week, drowning coastlines, silencing vox towers, even the ecclesiarchy began to whisper forbidden prayers to the abyssal emperor. They said he had returned to reclaim what was once his, the waters of humanity's cradle, the last uncorrupted domain, and beneath the surface of holy Terra, where the light of the Astronomicon cannot reach, something moved. It was not chaos. It was not man. It was something older. Something that remembered when gods walked the tides and men were still afraid of the dark. But that was only the beginning, for the seas of the Imperium were about to awaken, and the Emperor was about to remember what he had drowned to build his throne. Before he was the Sea King, before the Imperium remembered his name in whispers, he was only a myth, a ripple in time lost between dimensions. The warp had taken many things across the eons. Ships, men, cities, entire worlds. But once it took something divine. He had fallen through a storm that was not of his world, a wound in reality where ocean met nightmare. The trident, once a weapon of peace and law, now thrummed with the madness of 1,000 drowned souls. When he opened his eyes, the sea around him was wrong. The water was thick, poisoned, metallic with decay. The sky above was not sky at all, only endless machinery and the blind light of orbiting cathedrals. He had arrived on Terra, but not the Terra he knew. The oceans were dead. The waves were chains. For decades, he wandered beneath those black waters. The remnants of the old seas, the Pan-Pacific tomb, the Atlantic graveyard, and the Indian chasm were infested with the ruins of the Golden Age. Sunken hive cities, drowned cathedrals, machine creatures that fed on silence. He spoke to the ocean, and the ocean wept. Its voice was faint but alive, trapped beneath centuries of oil, ash, and divine neglect. It whispered of an empire that had bled it dry, of a false god who turned the seas into waste so his children could reach the stars. And in that grief, the man once called Arthur Curry remembered his duty to protect life. But in this galaxy, life was the rarest sin of all. The first beings he met were not men, but servitors, half machine, half corpse. They walked the seabed on metal limbs, harvesting minerals from the drowned crust. They did not speak. They did not breathe. And when he tried to command them, they turned their welding claws against him, reciting hymns to the Omniscia. He killed them out of mercy. Their blood clouded the water with oil and static. From their wrecks, he learned the first truth of the 41st millennium. Humanity had become a machine that forgot it was ever alive. It took him years, maybe centuries, to find the living. They dwelled in sealed domes deep below the equator, descendants of ancient ocean colonies. Their bodies were pale and thin, adapted to eternal shadow. They called themselves the Thalassans, the last true children of the sea. They feared the surface. They worshipped the emperor, though none had ever seen the sky. Their religion was one of drowning, of cleansing sin through suffocation. When they saw him, they thought him an angel of the deep throne. His golden eyes burned through their darkness. His voice rolled like a storm through the domes. "You have forgotten your mother," he said. "The sea is not your prison. It is your home." And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Thalassans rebelled. They tore down the statues of the emperor that rusted in their plazas. They unsealed the domes and let the ocean rush in. They called him Aqua Imperator, the emperor of the abyss. He taught them the old ways of breath and current, how to listen to the water, not the vox, how to hear the pulse of the living ocean through the weight of machines. But the Imperium above noticed. When entire subsea mining colonies stopped transmitting tithes, the Inquisition descended, first with suspicion, then with fire. And thus began the first drowned crusade. The surface world sent its killers. The Adeptus Mechanicus in rust-red submarines, Astartes encased in deep-sea armor, and priests of the ecclesiarchy chanting prayers that boiled the water with holy sound. They found the Thalassans waiting in silence, the Sea King at their center. His trident split the waves with impossible light. Under his command, the ocean itself fought back, pressure collapsing steel hulls, currents dragging drop pods into trenches, monstrous leviathans smashing the holy fleets like driftwood. It was not a battle, it was a reclamation. The waters of Terra, long forgotten and enslaved, rose against their masters. And from that day, the Imperium declared the deep oceans of Terra excommunicate extremis, forbidden zones. No ship was to sail them. No priest was to bless them. The Mechanicus sealed the records. The ecclesiarchy rewrote the prayers. But among the drowned, a prophecy was born. When the sky gods fall silent, the tide shall speak once more. And so he waited, building his kingdom in the deep, watching the Imperium rot above the waves, while the sea, his sea, healed and remembered its strength. But the tides of the galaxy are never still. Soon the stars themselves would cry out, and something far darker than mankind would come, drawn by the sound of living water in a dead age. The sea is patient, metal rusts, flesh rots, but salt endures. In the dark age beneath Terra's waves, every weapon, every tool, every ritual of the Thalassan Empire carried that truth, that everything returned to the ocean in time. Their empire had no forges, no manufactorums, no sacred oils of the Mechanicus. They built with what the sea provided: bone, coral, chitin, shipwrecks, and the skeletons of those who dared descend. To the surface dwellers it was heresy. To the Thalassans it was home. The trident of the abyss, it began with the trident. Not a symbol, a will, a living instrument of the sea's consciousness. It was older than the Imperium itself, forged from a meteor that fell into the pre-human ocean when the stars were still young. When Arthur found it again in the deep trenches of Terra, it pulsed like a heartbeat, whispering of tides long forgotten. The Mechanicus would call it Xeno-Artifact Sigminal, for it obeyed no logic, no metal, no code. But the Thalassans called it the Voice of the Abyss. When raised, it could still a tempest or summon one from silence. It could tear apart the armor of a space marine with the force of the deep. But it demanded something in return, a memory. Each strike took a piece of the wielder's past, feeding the abyss. That was why, over centuries, their Sea King's eyes grew hollow, and his voice trembled with echoes of lives he no longer remembered. They said he no longer recalled his own name. Only the sound of waves breaking against forgotten shores. Armor of the drowned, the soldiers of the Thalassan Empire did not wear ceramite or plasteel. They wore the bones of their own dead, the remains of drowned comrades polished white, woven with living coral that fused into their flesh. Each plate pulsed faintly, alive with microorganisms that drank from the warrior's blood. Every piece was sacred, every scar a prayer. They called it shell-born armor. It grew with its wearer, thickening with victories, cracking when doubt took root. When a soldier lost faith, their armor withered, collapsing into dust. To outsiders, they looked like monsters, spectral divers wrapped in glimmering bone and coral, moving in silence through the deep. To themselves, they were cathedrals of memory. The singing harpoons in the upper trenches, where pressure could crush a titan's knee joint, the Thalassans used weapons that sang. Their harpoons were crafted from the spine of abyssal leviathans, creatures half machine, half myth, raised from the time when mankind still feared the sea. Each harpoon carried a resonant crystal that screamed through the water when thrown. The sound could pierce armor, shatter glass, and rupture lungs. They called them sirens. The sound of a siren harpoon became the Thalassan war song. Those who heard it above the surface said it was like the ocean itself crying out for vengeance. The Leviathan engines, not all of their war machines, were born of flesh. Some were forged from what they found in the ruins of the Mechanicus ocean colonies. Colossal exoshells of steel and machine spirit, once used for mining and excavation. Aquaman repurposed them, repaired them not with metal, but with the living ocean itself. Coral grew over their hulls, barnacles embedded into circuits. Tentacles filled the empty spaces where servitor crews once sat. They became Leviathan engines, crawling citadels of bone and iron that walked the sea floor like gods in armor. Their movement was slow, deliberate, each step shaking the seabed for miles. Within them, thousands of thalassans prayed, their voices merging into a single drone that kept the machine alive. When a Leviathan died, its body sank to the trenches and was reborn as a reef, a grave that became sanctuary. Even in death, they served the sea. Symbols of power, the thalassans bore no banners. Cloth rotted, ink washed away. Instead, they carved their devotion into their skin. Every soldier bore the mark of the current, a spiral tattoo etched with bioluminescent ink that pulsed with their heartbeat. When they died, the light faded. When they lied, it flickered. There was no deception beneath the sea. The priests, known as the Salted, replaced their eyes with pearls, a ritual of blindness to see as the sea sees. The deeper their faith, the less human they appeared. Some grew gills, others translucent skin, a few fins. The sea remade them as it saw fit. To live in the Thalassan Empire was to surrender your humanity and earn something purer. The surface called it corruption. They called it clarity. The irony of faith when imperial scribes later described them, they wrote with disgust, beasts that mock the emperor's image. But the truth was crueler. Their weapons, their armor, their faith, all were born not from hatred of humanity, but from its memory. Every coral blade carried fragments of ancient hymns. Every Leviathan engine bore inscriptions stolen from imperial psalters. Every prayer whispered beneath the water was a distortion of the emperor's own words, turned back against him like a mirror. They were not monsters. They were what mankind had left behind when it fled the sea for the stars. And in every weapon they built, there was sorrow, the sorrow of knowing that even as they rose, they were fighting a war they could never win, because the Imperium would never allow beauty to survive. The tide was rising again. Aquaman stood upon the back of a sleeping Leviathan, trident glowing faintly in the gloom. He looked upward, through miles of pressure and darkness toward the blinding light of the surface. They think the ocean is beneath them, he whispered, but the tide remembers everything it swallows. The Leviathan's eyes opened, and the deep began to move once more. The ocean is vast, but even in its silence, it breeds whispers. No empire, not even one born beneath the waves, is free from hunger, from envy, from the soft rot that begins in the heart. At first, the Thalassan Empire thrived in the quiet dark. They sang hymns in the currents. They hunted the drowned beasts of the abyss. They built cathedrals of coral and bone, living sanctuaries that glowed like submerged suns. Children were taught to listen to the heartbeat of the sea instead of the pulse of the machine god. Every soul had purpose. Every death fed the living. But peace is a surface illusion. Beneath, the current always shifts. The quiet hunger years turn to decades. The deeper cities began to starve. The sea could feed bodies, but not belief. Faith, like air, grows thin when rationed. Some Thalassans began to question why their god-king never ascended, why he never brought the storm to the surface to cleanse the Imperium and reclaim the skies. They whispered that he had grown old, cautious, afraid. Others hungered for what the surface had, the metal, the machines, the stars. They envied the Imperium's cruelty because at least cruelty brought change. The first betrayal, the first rebellion began in the city of Saltspire, a reef-grown fortress built from the bones of a titan that had fallen into the sea centuries ago. Its ruler, Admiral Cathon, had once been Aquaman's most trusted commander. A man who believed that the tides should serve mankind, not rule it. He spoke softly, as all traders do. He said the Sea King was a relic, a god of mercy in a universe that worshipped fire. He promised progress, power, and alliance with the surface if only the old god were dethroned. For a time, his words spread like plankton, invisible but everywhere. Then, one night, the waters above Saltspire turned black. The city's lights died, one by one. They say the Sea King came alone. He carried no army, only the trident. He walked through the city's flooded halls, past statues of himself now defaced with iron and rust. When he reached Cathon, the admiral knelt and said, "We only wanted to see the sky again." Aquaman's reply was cold, almost human. "Then I'll give it to you." The ocean above Saltspire split open, a perfect circle of calm, and sunlight poured through for the first time in centuries. It was beautiful. It was also the last thing they ever saw. When the water crashed down again, the city was gone. The current carried fragments of coral, shards of bone, and voices that still screamed even as they sank. Saltspire became a warning, and the Sea King's mercy ended that day. The eyes of the abyss after Saltspire. Paranoia spread through the empire like blood in water. No one spoke freely. The priests of the Salted began to listen, not with ears, but with sonar implants that echoed lies like heartbeats. Neighbors vanished. Whole families were accused of treason because their lights flickered the wrong way. The Thalassans learned a new kind of faith built on fear. They began to carve new prayers into their skin. The sea sees, "We are never alone." The living cities grew quieter, darker. The songs of unity turned into hymns of guilt. The divers wore a faction of Thalassan outcasts, scavengers, hunters, and hermits, fled into the deeper trenches. They called themselves the Drowned Sons. They claimed that the Sea King had become a tyrant, more cruel than the Imperium he once defied. Their leader, a woman named Saren, bore gills that bled when she prayed. She spoke to things even deeper than the king's reach, entities that slumbered beneath the seabed, older than mankind's dreams. Her followers mutilated themselves to mimic those things. They tore out their eyes, split their tongues, and painted their armor with the silt of the abyss. They waged war not with tridents or leviathans, but with silence. They attacked through shadows, cutting off entire districts without a sound, leaving behind only stillness and blood. They whispered to the currents, "The true ocean does not serve, it devours." For the first time, the Thalassan Empire fought itself, tide against tide, faith against faith. The fracturing of the Sea King Aquaman could not understand them. He had given them life, unity, purpose. Yet they had turned on him, carving his name into curses. The trident began to resist him, as if sensing his doubt. Its light flickered, its hum now a rasping whisper. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could hear voices beneath the hum, voices of those he had drowned. They asked him softly, "Was it worth saving us?" He stopped answering after a while. Acts of kindness, acts of death in those years of terror. Kindness became rebellion. A Thalassan who shared food or mercy or silence with another risked death. The Salted patrolled every dome. One story tells of a child who found a wounded, drowned son hiding beneath a coral altar. She gave him air from her mask. When the priests found them, they drowned her in front of the city, chanting, "Mercy is heresy." The drowned son escaped, and the next night, an entire district went dark. Its walls shattered, its water thick with blood. The sea had no sides anymore, only hunger, the return of the surface while they tore each other apart below. The surface world began to stir. The Imperium's augurs detected strange movements beneath Terra, seismic patterns that matched the rhythm of the Astronomicon itself. The Inquisition called it abyssal resonance. They prepared their purging fleets, but when they came, they found no empire, only ruins. The Thalassan cities had gone silent. Their lights were gone, their prayers forgotten. Only one signal remained, a single word repeating in the dark, in an ancient dialect of old Earth. Forgive. The Inquisition assumed it was a distress beacon, but deep beneath the ocean, far below the scanners, the Sea King still watched. His eyes glowed faintly, like lanterns in a graveyard sea. He had learned a terrible truth. Even the sea, given enough time, drowns itself. The oceans boiled for 1,000 leagues. From the shattered reefs of Kaltha's drowned moons to the blackened coasts of the Segmentum Pacificus, the Sea King's wrath echoed in the marrow of planets. The war that began as whispers beneath the tides became a storm that drowned armies and silenced cities. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium of Man faced a war it could not map, nor measure, nor fully comprehend. A war beneath the surface of worlds. The awakening of the abyss, it began with tremors. At first, the administratum dismissed the quakes as tectonic unrest. Then the ocean split, and something vast, ancient, and armored with coral and steel rose from the trenches. It was not chaos, nor Xenos in the familiar sense. It was Aquaman's legion. From the deep crawled leviathans the size of voidcraft, each bearing sigils of the Atlantean runes fused with imperial iconography. They were living vessels, biomechanical constructs bound to the Sea King's will. Inside them dwelled hybrid soldiers, half man, half sea beast, clad in glimmering armor that flowed like molten gold underwater. When they breached, the skies darkened. The sound of their emergence was mistaken for the death knell of planets. The Imperium called them tidal hosts. Aquaman called them his kin. The Imperium strikes back, the response came swift. The Adeptus Mechanicus demanded they biological vessels for study. The Ecclesiarchy denounced Aquaman as a false god of the abyss. Even the Inquisition sent kill teams armed with melta charges and sanctified harpoons. They never returned. Entire squads of stormtroopers vanished beneath the waves of the planet Nereid IV. Vox transmissions captured only screams and a sound, a deep, mournful horn echoing through water. The Sea King's warning. The Imperium's fear grew. Rumors spread that the oceans themselves obeyed a god other than the Emperor, that prayers whispered on the shore were answered by something ancient and merciful or monstrous. The Ordo Hereticus declared a crusade. But crusades mean little when ships sink before they reach the shore. The Leviathans ascend, the war escalated into legend. 1,000 Leviathans rose from the depths, guided by Aquaman's hand. They met the fleets of the Imperial Navy in the atmosphere, swimming through the void, their armored hides glowing with bioluminescent wards. Their tendrils lashed at starships. Their roars echoed through void steel hulls. A captain of the battle fleet Pacificus once reported before his Vox went silent. The sea has come for us, but there is no sea here. They called it the Leviathan War. A dozen ocean worlds fell beneath the tidal onslaught. In some, Aquaman spared the weak and washed the corrupted clean. In others, he drowned entire hive cities without remorse. His mercy was selective, a reflection of balance, not malice. To him, humanity had become estranged from its origins. The Imperium had forgotten the tides that once birthed life. He sought to remind them with waves that crushed mountains. The sea and the warp, but not all tides were his to command. In the depths of the warp, something stirred. An ocean older than Atlantis itself. It sensed Aquaman's presence, his dominion over the seas, and it hungered. It whispered through drowned psychers and mutated seers. It offered him a crown woven from the flesh of drowned gods. The name of that presence was Nautical Karn, a demon of Tsench and Nurgle both, the god of rotting currents, promised him eternal dominion, the right to drown the stars. And for the first time, Aquaman hesitated, not from temptation, but from understanding. The sea that he ruled in the material universe had a mirror in the warp, an endless, polluted abyss of screaming souls. If he fell, the two would merge. Reality would drown. The duel beneath worlds, so he descended alone. He dove into the heart of the ocean on Nereid IV, through layers of pressure that would crush titans, until the sea itself turned to light. There, in the silence, Nautical Karn awaited him. The duel lasted 3 days. The water boiled with psychic fire. Leviathans thrashed above, sensing their lord's struggle. Every planet touched by Aquaman's tide trembled. When he emerged, he carried the severed tendril of the demon, still writhing, still whispering. His armor was cracked. His trident glowed with runes older than Terra. He had won, but at a cost. Part of his soul had drowned with the demon. From that day on, his eyes no longer reflected sunlight. Only the deep. The Leviathan War had ended, or so the Imperium's scribes declared, eager to bind a ribbon around yet another unexplainable calamity and move on. The ocean stilled, fleets withdrew, and Administratum records stamped it as a localized xeno-organic uprising. But the oceans did not forget. Nor did the abyss sleep. Beneath the calm, something ancient still breathed, and the memories of the drowned stirred again. the echo of a king on the water world of Nereid IV. Survivors whispered of a shape gliding beneath the waves, seen only during eclipses. Fishermen told of glowing eyes that watched them from the depths, not in hunger, but in mourning. Children born near the coast sometimes awoke speaking in an ancient tongue, murmuring names no human priest could translate. When asked who taught them, they would always answer, "The sea remembers." These were no mere tales, for deep within the trenches, the Atlantean vaults still pulsed with life. Coral towers grew around the ruins of the Leviathans. Within them, half-mechanical hearts beat in rhythm with the ocean's tides. The Sea King's essence lingered, not as a ghost, but as a current that moved unseen, shaping life itself. And across the Imperium, that current began to twist destiny once more. Mechanicus salvaged the Adeptus Mechanicus, unable to resist forbidden knowledge, sent their most zealous magi to harvest what remained of Aquaman's technology. They called it Project Pelagos, dredge ships bristling with plasma cranes descended into the abyssal plains. They dragged up Leviathan husks and Atlantean metal, their mechadendrites trembling with data they could not decode. One Muggos explorator, Altis Vorn, recorded a final log before his mind collapsed into binary static. This is not metal. It breathes. The structure adapts. When exposed to void light, it sings. The Sea King did not build machines. He grew them. Moments later, the recording dissolved into a haunting sound. The same horn that had echoed through the Leviathan War. Within weeks, the entire expedition vanished. The Mechanicus declared the zone contaminated by sentient biomass. The locals called it what it was, the King's Grave, the cult of the tides, while the Mechanicus struggled with forbidden science. Faith itself began to corrode. Along the coasts of ocean worlds, new sermons spread in whispers. A symbol carved in driftwood and coral appeared in hidden shrines, a trident piercing a sun. They were not heretics in their own eyes. They claimed to worship the Emperor's reflection, the divine balance he had sent to cleanse the sea. But the ecclesiarchy saw only blasphemy. When the priests burned the shrines, the tides rose higher. When they executed the faithful, the waters turned red. By night, they heard songs, low, harmonic chants rising from the surf. Songs about a king who would return when the stars drowned in their own light. The warp stirs far beyond the material. The warp's oceans rippled. Nautical Karn, the demon once slain by Aquaman, began to reform from the residue of drowned souls. The great ocean of the warp, that endless psychic tide, began to pulse in rhythm with the material sea. And from that resonance, new horrors emerged. Warp leviathans, translucent, half-real abominations, began appearing in the deep void, attacking pilgrim ships near maritime worlds. They were called tide spirits, though the Inquisition knew the truth. They were echoes of Aquaman's power, reflections of his will, distorted through chaos. The Sea King had bound the two oceans, real and unreal, more tightly than anyone understood. Now, even his silence was reshaping the galaxy. The living trident on a forgotten shore of the planet Pelagos 7. A scavenger found something that should not have existed. A trident buried half in the sand, pulsing faintly with light. When he touched it, visions flooded his mind, of coral cities, of drowned empires, of a man with eyes like the deep. The weapon was alive, chose him, and in the decades that followed, rumors spoke of a new figure rising in the sector. A warlord who commanded storms and fleets alike, claiming to be the voice of the king returned. Whether he was Aquaman reborn or merely another pawn of the warp, none could say. But the seas began to shift once more, and old prayers returned to human lips. He shall rise when the stars fall. He shall breathe when the void forgets air. And the sea shall remember its king. The last drowned archive far below the ruins of Terra's dead oceans. In a flooded archive no human had entered in millennia. An ancient Mechanicum datasphere flickered to life. It bore one recording, a voice, broken, distorted, yet unmistakably human. If you hear this, know that I am still watching. The tides are not done with you. You think the stars are eternal, but even they drown, given time. A heartbeat, then silence, then faintly the sound of waves. The Imperium never found the source. But across the galaxy, for the first time in 10,000 years, a new myth began to spread among voidfarers and shore-dwellers alike. That when the Emperor's light fades, the Sea King will return, not to conquer, but to cleanse, to drown the galaxy one last time. It began with the silence of stars. At first, it was dismissed as warp interference, a flicker in the Astronomicon, a heartbeat of darkness stretching across the void. But it did not pass. The light of the Emperor, the psychic beacon by which all ships sailed, faltered, then dimmed, and across 1 billion worlds, humanity felt a chill older than history itself, the memory of drowning. The cracks in the heavens' hive cities trembled as oceans rose against their shores. Entire coastlines were devoured in storms that defied reason. Waves 3 miles high, rolling with unnatural grace, swallowing continents. The ecclesiarchy called it divine punishment, the Emperor's cleansing flood. But those who lived long enough to see the second tide knew it was not his wrath. It was the sea's. The Mechanicus tried to explain it with science. They failed. The Inquisition tried to erase it with fire. The flames died, smothered by endless rain, and then the messages began. Vox transmissions from beneath the waves, faint and rhythmic. They carried a pattern no lex mechanic could decipher. 3 tones, followed by silence, repeated infinitely. He is coming. The awakening of the abyss on Nereid 4. The ocean began to glow. Pale light spread through its depths like veins through flesh. The water shimmered as if it remembered sunlight for the first time in 10,000 years. From those depths rose structures. Not ships, not ruins, but living citadels of coral and steel, towers shaped like tridents, bridges woven from kelp that breathed oxygen into the storm. The thalassans, descendants of those first deep dwellers who had worshipped the Sea King, emerged from their abyssal temples. Their skin gleamed with bioluminescent marks. Their eyes reflected stormlight. They spoke only one phrase in unison: "The King remembers us." And in that moment, The tides across the galaxy synchronized. Oceans from Holy Terra to Mackridge began to pulse with one rhythm, the rhythm of a heartbeat. The return the Trident was no longer legend. From the core of the deep, a shadow rose, vast, radiant, terrible. He was not the man who had fallen from another world. He was more and less, a god made from grief and water, the sum of every drowned prayer. His eyes burned not with rage, but sorrow. The Imperium's orbital augurs captured his emergence. A figure rising through storms, lightning dancing along his armor of coral and void light. Where his feet touched land, the ground melted to glass. Where he spoke, the air itself wept. The Sea King had returned. The judgment of Terra when he reached the world once called Terra. He found not the cradle of man, but a tomb. The oceans were stagnant and black, choked with millennia of poison and rust. Cathedrals leaned into the tides, their bells tolling underwater. Statues of the Emperor stared blindly through the rain. Aquaman, or what remained of him, stood before the silent palace and raised his hand. The seas obeyed. In one final, world-shaking tide, the waters reclaimed their throne. The throne world drowned. The ecclesiarchy's great basilicas sank beneath the waves. The voices of the high priests were the last to vanish, still reciting their final litany. The Emperor protects, then silence. Terra was gone. In its place, a single endless ocean, serene, cold, and alive. The drowned Imperium in the centuries that followed, the galaxy adapted or perished. Planets once scorched by desert now gleamed with seas reborn. Others vanished beneath the tides entirely, transformed into blue orbs teeming with strange new life. Warp travel became unpredictable. Psychic storms mirrored the tides. Ships could sail for years and find themselves returned to the same system, guided by unseen currents. A new faith emerged, not in the Emperor, not in chaos, but in the balance. The people called themselves the Tidebound, and their creed was simple. All things drown, all things rise again. They built floating temples of living coral. They prayed not for salvation, but for remembrance. And in the depth of every ocean, a faint golden light pulsed, like the reflection of a lost king watching over them. The last chronicle, an inquisitor named Lyridax recorded the final account before her ship vanished into a storm. The Imperium calls this a curse. I call it balance. The Sea King did not destroy mankind, he freed it. He gave us back what we buried. Fear, awe, reverence. Perhaps this is what divinity was meant to be. I hear him in my dreams now. His voice is not command, but mourning. He says the stars were never ours. They were merely reflections on the surface. Her ship was found centuries later, perfectly preserved, drifting in a glassy sea on an unnamed world. No crew remained. Only her journal sealed in coral. The last line read, "The tides are eternal. We endure until we are water again." Epilogue. The song beneath now, when voidfarers pass ocean worlds, they sometimes hear it. A low hum beneath the static, like the sound of the deep breathing. Some say it's just the wind. Others claim it's the Sea King himself, whispering from the abyss. Sleep now. The stars are just waves waiting to break.